of one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so you will fulfill the law of Christ. For if a man think himself to be something when he's nothing, he deceiveth himself. Let every man prove his own work, then shall he also have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another. For every man should bear his own burden. Let him that taught in the word of communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to the flesh should of the flesh reap corruption, and he that soweth unto the Spirit should reap life everlasting. Let us not then be weary in well-doing, for in due season we should reap, if we think not. As we have therefore an opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto those of the household of faith. At this time, I would ask you all in the spirit of collegiality during this budget presentation to join me in the words of our Lord in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members again. When the business of this House suspended yesterday evening, the honorable member for Mount Moriah had reserved the floor. The chair now recognizes the honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And good morning to my honorable colleagues. Before I commence my substantive remarks and introduction, Mr. Speaker, please permit me to digress for just a few minutes. I know that time is of the essence. And I have a lot to say because within the Ministry of National Security, we continue to do the business of the people. And I would hope at the end of my term, or this term, when the people of this country would have had an opportunity to examine my stewardship, they would say in return, the minister, a job well done. Mr. Speaker, I want to do something that I don't normally do, which is to talk a little about myself. I generally leave that up to others to do and trust that their judgment will be the correct one. But more than 3 years ago, Mr. Speaker, when the FNM decided to choose me as a candidate for the Mount Moriah constituency, I said to the leader and those within the constituency of Mount Moriah who was very pivotal, my selection, that I deemed it an honor and that I would do my very best to ensure that I represent the people of Mount Moriah. By extension, now that I am the Minister of National Security, the people of this nation to the best of my ability. Speaker, when I was chosen by the leader of this party, the member for Kalani, to serve the capacity as the Minister of National Security, one of those members within his cabinet, I intimated to him that I deemed it an honor. I also said to the leader that I am who I am. Anytime, at any time, I feel that the cabinet is taking a course or a direction that goes completely against who I am, how I was brought up, you need not worry. I will tender my resignation, go in another direction. See, Mr. Speaker, I hold no one's bag. I carry no one's bag. The person you see out here today, the person you see cabinet or anywhere else, you see who I am. That's how I was brought up. And I will never change for anyone. My obligation as the Minister of National Security, Member of Parliament for the great constituency of Mount Moriah, is to the people of this country, not to any one individual. Not to any one individual. Whenever I see wrong, whether it's in cabinet, outside of cabinet, in the bathroom, outside, I'm going to express myself. Only way I know how to. And so I say this in closing on this chapter, Speaker. This is who I am. Hold no grudge against anyone, no indifference against anyone. I take my job very seriously. At the end of the day, I have to account. Account to the people who elected me, serve as their member of parliament. Account to the party who entrusted in their confidence. And account to my leader, having selected me to serve as a minister in cabinet. Speaker, my own business. Anytime I feel as an individual that I can no longer serve, I know exactly what I need to do. Judge me. Judge me on what we promise as a government to deliver in respect to ministry that I've been given responsibility to be. All I ask. All I ask. See? Because we can come into this place as is. And that's what's been going on for decades now. We can postulate. We can make up. At the end of the day, the Bahamian people, they know best. This generation can see beyond the fluff and the nonsense and the waste of time. They can see beyond that. And each and every one of us will be measured. Don't come here and say what you could have done or what should have been done. The question is when you had an opportunity to effect change, did you do it? And if you didn't, why? So, Mr. Speaker, I deem it a privilege to rise in this honorable House to make my contribution to the 2020-2021 budget debate. I am thankful to my wife, Mr. Speaker, Stacy, and our children, Joshua and Kai, who continue to love and support me during my strongest moments, lift me up during my weakest. Mr. Speaker, according to Giacomo Casanova, heart and head are the consistent parts of character. Temperament has almost nothing to do with it. Character is dependent upon education and is susceptible of being corrected and improved. The people of Mount Moriah constituency, including the associations of Yellow Elder Gardens, Millennium Gardens, and Stapleton Gardens, the Mount Moriah executive team, and the hard-working consultative committee members continue to give of themselves to improve the quality of life for every constituent throughout the constituency of Mount Moriah. And for this, I am eternally grateful. I am eternally grateful to Mr. Bennett Minnis and his team, the F&M executives within the constituency, for the work that they continue to do to support our efforts. As elected officials, Mr. Speaker, we have an obligation to be at the forefront and ever mindful of the needs of the people we were elected to serve. The last 10 months have been a very challenging period for all Bahamians, brought as a result of Hurricane Dorian and the COVID-19 pandemic. These major disasters have resulted in extreme financial hardships, high unemployment, and uncertainty for so many of our people. Recognizing this, we were among the first constituency to begin addressing the dire need of our constituents by introducing a feeding program. We continue to commit ourselves to providing food and financial support to several of our community outreach centers within our constituency. Mr. Speaker, the need throughout our communities and nation has been overwhelming. In less than 2 weeks, we received more than 50,000 hits on our Facebook page from persons all across this land. Mr. Speaker, there's considerable work ahead of all of us. Mr. Speaker, I wish to extend a belated Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers of the Mount Moriah constituency. This year, we were unable to host our annual luncheon and gospel concert. However, I promise to make up for it next year. Despite not being able to host our Mother's Day festivities due to the COVID-19 pandemic, instead, we sought to recognize those mothers serving on the front line in our country, including health workers, police, defense force officers, corrections, customs, immigration, and sanitation personnel. Mr. Speaker, a note to our fathers in Mount Moriah: we will not be able to host our annual Father's Fun Day this year. Instead, as we have done for the mothers, we will honor our fathers on the front line. No worries, Mount Moriah Dad, we got you. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity before I begin my substantive presentation to congratulate Ms. Debbie Lightburn, President of the Jubilee Gardens Neighborhood Watch Council, and our hardworking team for being awarded second place by Neighborhoods USA or NUSA, on May 22nd, 2020, for Neighborhood of the Year. This watch group, which is a member of the Ministry of National Security National Neighborhood Watch Council, Southwestern Division, is also a contender for the Neighborhood Newsletter 2020, which will be announced very soon by NUSA. Mr. Speaker, since the budget contribution by the member for East Grand Bahama, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, there has been much debate from various quarters on the financial measures that will have to be implemented during this upcoming fiscal period as a result of COVID-19 to safeguard and secure our economy. Mr. Speaker, while debates are healthy to the furtherance of any successful democracy, it is important for all of us to note that the measures that will be outlined or that have been outlined by the member for East Grand Bahama on behalf of the government may be a difficult pill to swallow for some of us. But let us consider for just a moment the disastrous fallout if we neglect to live up to our responsibility as a government. Mr. Speaker, our livelihoods and the future of our children and this nation would be in tremendous peril. Mr. Speaker, our kids will be cursing us in our graves for failing to act responsibly when we had the power to do so. Mr. Speaker, I offer my congratulations to the member for East Grand Bahama and his technical team for delivering a responsible, well-prepared, and timely budget. Mr. Speaker, let's be real. We are in uncharted territories and in unprecedented times. The World Bank President, Malpass, stated that COVID-19 has become a devastating blow for global economies, and the financial crisis may be felt for at least a decade. G7 countries are being impacted the most, as 80% of workers live in those countries and were required to close, with peak closure occurring between March 22nd and through 29th. Mr. Speaker, the challenges we face are not unique to the Bahamas by any stretch of the imagination. We are in the midst of a global crisis, one which will require a global response if we are to avoid a global financial meltdown. Let it not be mistaken, Mr. Speaker, that every single country on the face of this earth has a collective responsibility to do its part. We are no different. Mr. Speaker, 80% of the visitors that travel to our shores come from the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, at this time, the U.S. currently leads the world in COVID-19 cases, and its unemployment rate stands at 10.4%. The IMF projects that by the end of the third quarter of 2020, the U.S. unemployment rate is expected to soar to 18%, which is a significant leap from where it stood at 4% just only a few months ago. If realized, this forecast would have a profound impact on our own financial situation. Some economists have forecasted that the deficits of several of the world's leading economies will increase, including China, which is projected to double to 11.2% from 6.4%. The United Kingdom and Spain will jump to about 8.3% from 2.1%, and Italy to 9.5%. As for the Bahamas, at the end of 2019, our employment rate stood at 11.5%. However, the IMF is projecting a rise to 15% by the end of 2020. Our real GDP growth is expected to decrease, according to the IMF, to minus 8.3% by the end of this year. Mr. Speaker, many of the world's leading economies had to resort to radical measures to stabilize their economies. The US, for example, have most recently passed a $3 trillion stimulus package on May 15, 2020. Meanwhile, the European Union is considering a $826 billion stimulus package to shore up its economies. In addition, Germany, one of the European Union's biggest economy, announced their common proposal for a $246 billion fund. It's to fund its COVID-19 stimulus plan. These are just some examples of the unprecedented measures being undertaken by governments around the world to protect themselves from falling off a fiscal cliff. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 is a stark reminder that small nation states like ours must begin to take seriously the diversification of its economies. Lip service will no longer do. Food independence and security are paramount. Mr. Speaker, nations like ours must, with the highest degree of urgency, introduce industries that will mitigate the drain on our foreign reserves, thereby reducing our vulnerability to external shocks. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say that this Hubert Minnis-led government has been exploring in a very serious way avenues to diversify our economy, to increase our entrepreneurship base, to reduce our dependence on imports, and move towards a greater level of sustainability. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me if I failed to acknowledge and congratulate the former Minister of Health, his leadership team, and all of the essential workers for the work that they continue to do that has resulted in our nation being recognized around the world as a leading example of how to manage a health crisis like COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, the man in the forefront, our leader, a medical doctor, a leader for a time such as this, the member for Kalani, and our Prime Minister, ought to be congratulated for his unflinching and compassionate leadership throughout this pandemic. Let there be no mistake that our successes as a country in managing this crisis is directly as a result of his decisive leadership, his ability to understand the problem, assemble the most capable and qualified professionals in the field, and to make sound decisions in the best interest of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, so far, so good. Mr. Speaker, to date, the Bahamas has recorded some 104 confirmed cases and 11 deaths. This reflects a mere 0.002% of the population. Some may say that we are a small nation, and indeed we are, but let us not diminish the efforts undertaken by this Minnis-led administration. We are among the first in the region to take the bold and necessary steps to protect and safeguard our people. Mr. Speaker, ours is a government of compassion. Despite the challenges we face and the uncertainty that looms ahead, this Minnis-led government continues to hold true to the slogan, "We are the people's government." To date, no government worker has been laid off. All continue to receive their salaries. Meanwhile, feeding, unemployment benefits, and renters assistance programs have been instituted to assist those Bahamians in need. As noted by the member for Garden Hills and the minister responsible for national insurance, and NIB paid over $49.8 million for 34,000 regular unemployment claims and over $9 million to 6,773 self-employed persons who would not ordinarily qualify for this type of assistance. Mr. Speaker, this is a caring government. Mr. Speaker, this is what good governance looks like. According to the Jamaican Observer, the Bahamas is a country that means business. It noted that our Prime Minister is keenly aware that meeting the health, economic, and social needs of its people is a balancing act that requires both prudence and sound judgment. They also noted that we're on the path to restoring our economy in spite, Mr. Speaker, of Hurricane Dorian and a new hurricane season. Mr. Speaker, let's reflect on that for just a second. This would have been catastrophic for almost any nation, developed or otherwise. A nation with less than 500,000 people would have experienced two of the most devastating crises in less than 1 year, 10 months. And we are still standing. We will emerge from this experience, Mr. Speaker, even stronger. The good people of this nation knew exactly what they were doing when they elected this Epinem administration as the government 3 years ago. Mr. Speaker, the side opposite either has a very short memory or suffers from a selected case of amnesia. Let me remind you, one of the principal reasons why you are only 4 today is because of your dismal handling of a storm that pales in comparison to Dorian. After Mr. Speaker, after Hurricane Joaquin and Matthew, your administration borrowed $150 million. But to this day, very little evidence and much controversy remains on how the money was spent. Mr. Speaker, like you often do, you borrow, spend at will. Mr. Speaker, like you often do, you borrow, spend at will, with no accountability. You want to hear this one? Like you often do, you borrow, you spend at will with no accountability, and leave us to clean up your mess. Mr. Speaker, no government in this nation's history has been faced with the unprecedented challenges that this Hubert Minnis-led government has been faced with. Yet, Mr. Speaker, we still stand. Our heads may be bloody, but unbowed. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to my substantive contribution for the 2020-2021 budget. I'm coming back to you. Mr. Speaker, our government places a high priority. Our government places a high priority on national security, right? As it viewed as one of the fundamental duties. In an effort to meet the demands of the 21st century, the Ministry of National Security continues to strengthen, as does the agencies under its remit. The goal is to make it more strategic in managing the affairs of safety and security throughout our nation. Mr. Speaker, the total capital and recurrent expenditures for the Ministry of National Security and the agencies under its remit for this upcoming fiscal period is $247,043,823. And this reflects a 3% increase from last year. $217,043,823 is allocated for recurrent expenditure, and this reflects a 1% decrease over last year. Meanwhile, $30 million is allocated for capital expenditure, and this reflects a 50% increase over last year. Mr. Speaker, here are the expenditures for the agencies under the remit of national security, the Royal Bahamas Police Force has been allocated $127,296,337, and this reflects a 4% decrease over last year. Recurrent expenditure is $122,268,807. This reflects a 1% decrease over last year. Capital expenditure is $5,027,530. This reflects a 47% decrease over last year. Mr. Speaker, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force has been allocated $67,946,654, and this reflects a 1% decrease over last year. Recurrent expenditure stands at $57,946,654. This reflects a 2% decrease over last year, and capital expenditure is $10 million. This reflects a 25% increase over last year. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas Department of Corrections has been allocated $37,600,383, and this reflects a 13% increase over last year. Recurring expenditure stands at $27,899,241, and this reflects a 4% decrease over last year. Capital expenditure is $4,701,142. The Parliamentary Registration Department, Mr. Speaker, has been allocated a recurrent expenditure of $1,512,234, and this reflects a 19% increase over last year. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to the Royal Bahamas Police Force. I now move to the Royal Bahamas Police Force, whose mandate is the maintenance of law and order. I would like to extend my sincerest gratitude to retired Commissioner of Police, Mr. Anthony Ferguson, for his many years of dedicated service to the Royal Bahamas Police Force and, by extension, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The same is extended to all of those officers within the Royal Bahamas Police Force who would have served and have since moved on. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Ferguson is currently being considered by this government to take up another position, and I hope to announce that very shortly. Mr. Speaker, the police force continues to go through a period of transformation, and it is now headed by now Commissioner Mr. Paul Roll, the 8th Commissioner of Police and an independent Bahamas. His executive team includes the first female Deputy Commissioner of Police. We believe in women. Angliston, we believe in women. We got time, but anyway. First female Deputy Commissioner, we have another Assistant Commissioner there. 3 new Assistant Commissioners and 1 acting Assistant Commissioners. Mr. Speaker, the government continues and remains committed to the manpower audit carried out during 2018. And as you will see from this list, from this poster here, the email addresses, cell numbers, and direct line of every command officer within the Royal Bahamas Police Force. What does that mean? It means that they ought to be reachable by every behemoth to express any concerns. And you will be hearing more about that from the Commissioner. Our primary objective at this time is to position the new Commissioner and his executive team for success. This most recent promotional exercise is a step in the right direction. And I commend all of those officers who would have been promoted and say to those who haven't, Continue to do your best. Your time will come. Mr. Speaker, the police force utilizes a combination of strategies, including increased visibility via mobile patrols, foot and bicycle patrols, improved intelligence gathering and operations, participations in neighborhood and community activities, and increased public contact. The real-time crime center will be centralized so that all technologies which will allow for efficient and effective policing through enhanced visibility, unified awareness, and appropriate levels of response. And so this is an example of taking this police force to a new level. This is what this government is doing. And so all of there is a method behind the technologies that we are acquiring, okay? And so that is our real-time crime center that is scheduled to be open very shortly. And all of the technologies that this government would have acquired will all be integrated. Mr. Speaker, this is the real-time crime center that is scheduled to be open very shortly. And these are the technologies that have been acquired by this government, and it will all be integrated to improve efficiency and delivery of service to the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, we are positioning this police force not only to be the best and most proficient and efficient and respected police organization in this region, but our expectations are even higher. We're looking at this agency to be one of the best and leading law enforcement agencies in the world. That is our objective. Coupled with ComStats, commanders use the interactive control mechanisms to present and discuss their specific crime problems and plans for managing the scene. This allows for analysis and accountability for reducing and monitoring the progress of individual divisions in achieving substantial reduction in crime. Mr. Speaker, for the period January 1 through May 31st, 2020, overall crime in the nation is down by some 3% compared to last year. Crimes against the person is down some 31%. Specifically, serious crimes such as murder is down 11%, attempted murder down 79%, and armed robbery is down some 35%. Robbery is down some 14%, rape is down some 30%, and unlawful sexual intercourse is down some 41%. Mr. Speaker, crimes against the property is up slightly, some 3%, compared to last year, the same time. However, property crimes such as burglary is down some 3%, housebreaking down some 9%, stealing is down 3%, and stealing from vehicle is down 1%. Mr. Speaker, of the 31 recorded murders, 20 or 64% were on New Providence, 8 or 26% on Grand Bahama, and 3 or 10% on the Family Islands. Irrespective, Mr. Speaker, of the island, the murder count in the Bahamas continues its downward trend, which means that our investments are paying dividends. The offense of murder, however, remains a vexing problem, particularly because many of our young men are dying at an alarming rate, while still with many years ahead of them. Of the 31 murder victims, for the first 5 months of this year, 26 or 84% were males, while 5 or 16% were females. The high propensity of men being killed as an historical precedent in the Bahamas. Similar to the global trend, men between the ages of 15 and 29 are at the highest risk of becoming victims and most likely perpetrators of murders. Simultaneously, homicidal violence have a higher propensity of occurring by an acquaintance and due to gang or organized criminal affiliation. Mr. Speaker, the same is reflected in our analysis of homicidal incidents for the first 5 months of this year. Approximately 32% of the murders were motivated by conflict or retaliation, with 19% which were motivated by drugs, according to police statistics. Of all of the murder victims, 26 persons or 84% were males and the remaining females. Of the total victim count, 20 persons or 65% were prolific offenders known to police. Mr. Speaker, 7 of the victims were on bail for various offenses, including murder, and 2 were being electronically monitored. This means that parents, both mothers and fathers, extended families, religious organizations, civil society, all have a responsibility to nurture our young men and women, thereby protecting and safeguarding and guarding their development. Mr. Speaker, firearms are a crucial enablers of high levels of violence, and use of the same positively correlates to homicides, armed robberies, and drugs. To date, 25 persons, or 80.6%, of the murder victims died by gunshot wounds. Therefore, as we have been aware for some time now, firearm seizures are key to reducing murders, as it is the preferred weapon of choice and has been for a very long time. It is encouraging, however, Mr. Speaker, to note that the police continues to have successes in firearm seizures, as 102 firearms and 1,838 rounds of ammunition have been seized within the first 5 months of this year. There were 73 pistols, 12 shotguns, 11 revolvers, and 6 rifles seized. Access to firearms, whether legal or illegal, remains one of the key variables in violence. Rest assured that the police are resolute in their mission to rid the streets of firearms. Mr. Speaker, closely associated with firearms and homicides are illegal drugs. From January 1 to May 31st, 2020, the top 4 drug seizures were 583 pounds of marijuana, 280 marijuana plants, and 140 pounds of cocaine, and 147 amphetamine tablets. From the seizures, there were 436 cases, which resulted in 486 persons being arrested, 306 persons being prosecuted, and 413 persons being charged. Mr. Speaker, with reference to road safety, there have been 25 fatalities, which reflects a 4% decrease from last year during the same time. Of the incidents, 15 or 60% were on New Providence, 4 or 16% on Abaco, and 3 or 12% on the island of Grand Bahama. Males accounted for 21 or 84%, while females accounted for 4 or 16%. The 25 victims included 7 passengers, 7 pedestrians, and 2 motorcyclists. Police also remain active in ticketing motorists, as 11,000, Mr. Speaker, 902 fixed penalty notices were served, and this reflects a 16% increase from last year, where 10,219 tickets were served. We are pleased, Mr. Speaker, that the number of traffic fatalities are decreasing, The police will continue its efforts to educate the public on road safety, along with the road traffic department, and to road safety measures, and to carry out its enforcement strategies throughout the length and breadth of this country. Mr. Speaker, both the ramification of hurricanes and this pandemic highlight the evolving role of law enforcement in maintaining public safety and security. As the number of COVID-19 cases increases, the men and women of the Royal Bahamas Police Force remain steadfast in their commitment to maintaining safety and upholding the law while safeguarding the well-being of our people. Mr. Speaker, Bahamians continue to witness our men and women in uniform working tirelessly to enforce the curfews and lockdown as instituted by the emergency orders. Mr. Speaker, I'm advised that for the most part, members of the public are adhering to these emergency orders. However, there will be persons who seek to challenge these orders. From March 24th to May 31st, 2020, there have been 1,134 persons arrested and charged, Mr. Speaker, with curfew violations. Approximately 783 persons, or 69% of the violations, were on the island of New Providence. 102 were on the island of Eleuthera, and that represents 9%. And Grand Bahama had 75 or 6%, and Exuma 71 or 6%, which rounded off the top three islands. Mr. Speaker, globally, measuring law enforcement outcomes have become extremely important to the success of promulgation, planning, and the execution of strategies. We are, again, experiencing measurable outcomes as reflected, Mr. Speaker, in our crime statistics, attributed to the success in our technologies, which includes the closed circuit televisions or CCTV program. Our goal is to establish over 750 operational cameras throughout the length and breadth of this country. Of the additional 507 or 28 sites, or 75 cameras have been installed in key areas and hotspots throughout New Providence. With weather permitting, Mr. Speaker, all of the cameras, the remaining out of the 507 cameras, should be installed by the end of 2020. Mr. Speaker, this month, $985,283 will be invested to advance this program. During the 2020-2021 fiscal period, the same amount will be duplicated by my ministry. The former payment ensures that the necessary hardware expansion, server, and cameras are available. Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford to return to where we once were in respect to our CCTV program. The latter allows for the maintenance and upgrade to the system. For the first quarter of the year, there has been request for CCTV video footage for 12 criminal investigations, 1 accident, and 1 police-involved shooting. Mr. Speaker, $1,337,432 was invested during the fiscal period for ShotSpotter. The final payment of $602,316 will be made in the new fiscal period. Mr. Speaker, from its launch date on March 28, 2019 to May 31st, 2020, the system is serving its intended purpose, which is to detect gunshots and allow faster response time from the police. There have been 920 gunshot incidents, including 442 multiple, 324 single, and 154 probable. The area of Robinson Road and East Street at the first and second highest repeated locations for gunshots. While Friday through Sundays were the most active days of the week, and the hours of 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. were the most active time. Mr. Speaker, we all are aware of the ongoing concerns regarding police-citizen encounters that are impacting nations across the world. This government has always kept relevant with critical issues involving policing. Bahamians, like citizens around the world, expect officers to perform their duties with the highest degree of professionalism. This is why our government has invested in technologies that will strengthen police accountability and transparency. This is being complemented by the Neighborhood Watch program and the reestablishment of the Police Complaints Inspectorate. Mr. Speaker, in February of this year, $688,561 was invested for 200 body-worn and 200 dash cams for patrol vehicles. The technologies are now on island. Angliston, I believe you had asked the question, they're now on island. And in order to meet our projected rollout periods, training is continuing online. And this is as a result of COVID-19. So we don't want to lose any time. Meanwhile, the signaling units for the dash cams have been installed in the new police vehicle. $232,357 will be invested during this month, while the duplicate amount will be paid during the upcoming fiscal period for the maintenance. Mr. Speaker, this cutting edge of police technology is expected to provide critical evidence for both internal and external investigations. It is anticipated that the projected rollout period will be August of 2020. Not long. I would wish to advise the public that we have been exploring less than lethal devices for the use by our police officers. This will be part of our first ever use of a force continuum program. We will keep the public informed of the implementation dates. Mr. Speaker, simultaneously, all of the hardware for Marco's Alert has been installed, and both telecommunications providers integrated. The system is in its testing phase and will soon be available nationally. Mr. Speaker, members of the public have begun to see infrastructural works on the digital boards in 4 locations, including the R.M. Bailey Park, Arawak Key, Blue Hill Road South, and JFK West. The program should be in operation August 2020. Not too long. Mr. Speaker, my ministry will invest some $350,000 in the new fiscal period for billboards in New Providence. The billboards would be used to broadcast important messages whenever an alert on a missing child is issued. It is important to note, Mr. Speaker, that Marco's alert system will be used, or can also be used by NEMA and other agencies of government to broadcast emergency messages. The capabilities of the systems are far-reaching, and it is our intent to utilize the platform sometime during this fiscal period to introduce a pilot around the sexual offenses registry, which was laid before this Parliament last year by this government. Mr. Speaker, in order for the police to meet both its administrative and operational mandates, recruitment remains a top priority. Recruiting and retaining the best is key for the Royal Bahamas Police Force sustainable development. Prior to coming into office, The force did not adequately engage its recruitment and required some 791 constables alone to meet its numbers. In total, Mr. Speaker, 271 officers have completed training and are now performing policing duties. Currently, there are 135 recruits undergoing training as we speak, 100 in New Providence and 35 on the island of Grand Bahama. The Grand Bahama recruits will graduate tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to attending that ceremony along with the Deputy Prime Minister and other members of Parliament from the island of Grand Bahama. I believe the Minister of Social Services will also be in attendance. We intend to recruit an additional 135 in the new fiscal period. Of note, we are assisting the Royal Turks and Caicos Police Force with training, and they will have 19 of their recruits at the graduation ceremony tomorrow. We congratulate them all. Mr. Speaker, to complement recruitment, professional development is essential if the force is to operate effectively. Since coming to office, 2,437 law enforcement personnel have completed training, including 281 officers who were trained internationally. We understand, Mr. Speaker, this government is ahead of the curve. We understand that if you're going to fix the issues associated with policing, training has to be on the forefront. And prior to coming into office, training was almost non-existent. Mr. Speaker, police stations are pivotal to the work of police officers, and decades of neglect continues to plague stations throughout the Bahamas. Simultaneously, the devastation of the recent hurricanes have added to the woes, especially on the islands of Grand Bahama and Abaco. Hurricane Dorian severely impacted the facilities and equipment on both islands, with an estimated loss of some $5,398,556. During this fiscal period, $623,134 was invested in renovations. $477,530 will be invested in this new fiscal period to the Internal Security Division building, the roofs of the Central and East Street South Police Station, and the Police Maintenance Department will complete the majority of this work. Mr. Speaker, during the new fiscal period, we will invest $1.5 million in fire trucks for East Street South and Elizabeth Estates and Carmichael Road Station. All of these stations were without fire trucks due to wear and tear on the previously issued one. These areas are some of New Providence's most populated districts. And when a fire is reported, fire trucks must leave from either police headquarters or East Street or Cable Beach to respond. These new trucks would reduce the response time to calls for assistance and provide a better opportunity to save people and property. Mr. Speaker, the police force is in need of additional handheld radio and mobile sets. This will meet the deficit needs due to increased strength from recruitment while aiding officers on various patrolling duties. We will invest some $700,000 for the purchase, while an additional $1.75 million will be invested for the purchase of firearms, ammunition, technical gear, tasers, bunker gear, and other equipment for our fire officers. Mr. Speaker, a sizable number of police fleet was lost during Hurricane Dorian. To assist, you guys left the cupboard bare. To assist the islands impacted, vehicles will be distributed from the second tranche of the fleet from the initial $5.9 million investment. The new fleet includes the 35 Dodge Chargers and 20 Segways. In addition, the agency is expected to receive 20 Ford Explorers and Interceptors, 6 Toyota 4Runners, and 1 safe boat, courtesy of our friends, the government of the United States of America. All right, the different modes of transport are now visible on the streets of the Bahamas. And, I look at TikTok every now and again. The young people keep me in touch with that. And it's always great to see the police vehicles on TikTok. So it shows that this government is living up to its promises. I understand. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the men and women of the Royal Bahamas Police Force for their tireless efforts, especially during this most difficult period in our nation. Your unselfish service and the commitment to duty will never be forgotten. On behalf of our government and this grateful nation, we say thank you to our police officers. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force mandate is to safeguard our maritime domain. I would like to extend my sincerest gratitude to the outgoing commander of the Defense Force, Commodore Bethel. Let's hear it for Commodore Bethel. For the many years of dedicated service to the Royal Bahamas Defense Force and by extension to the people of this nation. The same is extended to all of the officers who would have recently retired from that great organization. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Bethel will continue his service in his new role as the Standard Inspector of the Security Forces within the Ministry of National Security. In his new role, he will be working through the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of National Security to support the three agencies in their efforts to provide high quality, effective, and responsive service to their clients, to our clients, the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, reviewing the respective agencies' programs and operations in accordance with their mandates, and making recommendations to the minister. Mr. Speaker, the Defense Force continues to transform, and it's headed by its 8th commander and 6th Bahamian, Commodore Dr. Raymond King. The agency also has a deputy Commodore, and that's Captain Shondell Pinder, and 6 commanders on the executive team. Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to meet with my, don't they look great, man? We coming. You all had them so far down. We're working on bringing them up. You guys had them so far. My. We're bringing the women up. We're working on that. You had them so far down. We're working on that. We're working on that. We're doing things. You see that? Those guys look great. I had an opportunity to meet with Commodore and his team. These are some sharp group of officers. They're ready. They're ready to transform that agency, and we're looking forward to it. We will provide them with the resources they need, right? And as you would see on that board, Mr. Speaker, telephone numbers, email addresses, and their command. And so the Bahamian people, they are accountable to the Bahamian people. So no hiding of cell phones, no hiding of email addresses. We want to see just how responsive these newly promoted officers are. Mr. Speaker, Hurricane Dorian has taught us a very hard lesson. The time has come for us to restructure and realign many of our agencies to meet the challenges constantly faced by small nation states in an ever-evolving, changing world. One of those important agencies is our Royal Bahamas Defense Force. As a result of this reality, we have embarked on a plan that will assist with the strategic realignment of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. With this in mind, we are partnering with a number of governments, including the government of the United States of America, who have offered assistance with strategic force management and design study, utilizing experts from the RAND Corporation. The Security Governance Draft Engagement Plan will focus on existing force design and management and capabilities-based planning and strategic human resource management. The goal is to develop a professional, high-performance workforce with performance excellence as a strategic vision. Mr. Speaker, since coming to office, our government has pledged to improve border protection by means of enhanced maritime domain awareness. The Defense Force utilizes a combination of strategies, including strong visibility through patrols, real-time communication, tracking and interceptions, and increased operation. For the period January 1 to May 31st, there were 8 migrant interdictions with 96 apprehensions, including 73 Haitian nationals and 13 Cuban nationals. This reflects a 72% reduction compared to last year when 342 migrants were apprehended. There were also 240 vessels boarding, which is down some 22% compared to last year when 306 vessels were boarded. Similarly, there was a decrease in sightings, intelligence, and/or reports of poaching vessels, which traditionally plundered fishing grounds on the Great Bahama Bank in southern Bahamas. Strategic positioning resulted in declining poaching interdiction by some 93% compared to the 2018-19 fiscal year when 10 vessels were interdicted. During this fiscal period, one Dominican vessel with some 15,000 pounds of products was seized, and court levied a fine of some $228,000. Mr. Speaker, the role of law enforcement continues to evolve, and managing the demands for the Defense Force services continues to rise. Despite losses from Hurricane Dorian, the agency was tasked with providing humanitarian and disaster assistance and security operations. The agency again responded to calls for jointly enforcing the emergency orders related to curfew management, sentry detail and quarantine facilities, food distribution centers, and social security assistance disbursements. Bahamians can rest assured that while they are not visible as other agencies, the Defense Force working around the clock. According, Mr. Speaker, to a Chinese philosopher, Sun Tzu, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Deterring advances and illegal activities can be achieved by visible defense strength. It is our goal to ensure that significant resources devoted to maintaining the Defense Force's capabilities are spent effectively and delivering value for money. Hence, decentralization of the agency's operation by establishing bases in the southern Bahamas is a major priority. Mr. Speaker, by the end of this upcoming fiscal year, we have to bury the ghost of the Sandy Bottom Pass. The project remains a clear example of poor governance and wasteful spending of the Bahamian people's monies by the previous administration. We have been committed to rectifying this matter because we are the people's government. As such, the deployment of ships, aircraft, detections, technologies, and personnel to Inagua and Ragged Island is progressing well and finally on track. Mr. Speaker, we ain't talking decentralization. We're going to deliver on decentralization. We can't have people complaining about no presence in the southern Bahamas, and we would have spent a significant amount of cash, the Bahamian people's money, over $300 million, on a project, and we still have everyone in New Providence. That ain't happening under this watch, Mr. Speaker. Not under this watch. So here's what we're going to do. Mr. Speaker, $440,639 was invested for the demolition and construction of 3 units at HMBS Matthew Town, messing facilities, renovations, perimeter lighting, and the installation of shore power. I am pleased to report that the decentralization process for the Royal Bahamas Defense Force on Inagua and Ragged Island will commence. This process is expected to be concluded within 3 months period, within a 3-month period. Will include the permanent presence of no less than 60 Marines and officers for Inagua and 25 for Ragged Island. Love to hear that. Where do you go? Exuma and Ragged Island? Boat equipped with staging of surface assets, vessels and accommodation to support it. So what I'm saying here is we don't want to see boats only in New Providence. The Bahamas is bigger than New Providence. We hear you, fishermen, Northern Lutra. We hear you. We hear your fishermen. Okay? We have an obligation to have a presence sustained in the Southern Bahamas. And this government, Mr. Speaker, intends to deliver on that promise. Mr. Speaker, this move will no doubt provide the Royal Bahamas Defense Force with improved situational awareness and better position to protect the Southern Bahamas from illegal poachers, illegal migrant smuggling, and drug smuggling. To complement, $600,000 will be invested for fuel storage facility in Inagua, Ragged Island, and the Coral Harbor bases. We cannot say to the Bahamian people, this is how we're spending your money. We're going to spend more than maybe close to 200 million on retrofitting vessels, purchasing vessels. We're going to sell them down south. And when they're low on fuel, they have to come to Nassau. We can't have that. That's not good governance, Mr. Speaker. We're fixing that for you. We're fixing that for the people of this country. Okay? All right? This will reduce excessive fueling, like I said, while no longer have to operate, and you know, Mr. Speaker, they will no longer have to operate generators. We were spending a significant amount of money on generators, on fuel for generators for years, because we did not have shore power, Senans. So you can imagine the wear and tear on those vessels. It is unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that it has taken this long for the alarm to be raised regarding extensive distance vessels had to travel from the south for refueling, only to have to travel back for duty. Mr. Speaker, we could not fathom that a government would have invested some $212 million in the acquisition and refurbishment of vessels, but never even once considered providing shore power for these vessels. But yet, Mr. Speaker, overnight, they have become experts on advising this government on fiscal matters. What a calamity. Are we serious? Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday, May 13, 2020, our government signed a $2.8 million contract with Flemis Electrical for the electrification of the base at the HMBS Coral Harbor, for electrical power for the patrol craft, Wild Bird at Coral Harbor. We will also invest some $4,944,000 for additional capital development upgrades to refurbish office spaces in the North Gate building, the refurbishment and upgrade of the institutional training facility in advance of its accreditation pursuit of its professional development programs, and virtual distinction as a maritime defense training institute, and our security improvements at the Coral Harbor base. Mr. Speaker, final preparation have been made for the movement of the remaining components of the newly acquired container city associated with logistics to Gunpoint Ragged Island for staging purposes, immediate response and access to the Great Bahama Bank. The government of the Bahamas has invested some $899,000 for 33 mobile accommodation units and auxiliary equipment to be used initially as a subsidiary based in Ragged Island to assist with operations in the Eastern Grand Bahama Bank until the main base is constructed. These are luxury facilities, Mr. Speaker. Presently, a component of the units are being utilized for staging purposes in Abaco for humanitarian assistance and security operations with the police force. Mr. Speaker, past experiences have proven that no single asset or equipment can adequately address all safety concerns. The government of the Bahamas has invested some $1.986 million for the maintenance, upkeep, corrective maintenance, and dry docking of vessels, including the HMBS Lawrence Major, that's the workhorse, the HMBS P-48, and Endurance Friendship vessels, P-129 and P-130, to ensure their high operational availabilities. Mr. Speaker, $4.1 million have been invested in the multi-agency drone program, which will be managed from the Defense Force. The Defense Force will be the lead agency and will integrate all law enforcement agencies and other government agencies such as Royal Bahamas Police Force, Customs Immigration, all of the law enforcement agencies. All right? Here is what we say we can give you. See, when I hear some of the talk out there on the streets, why are we paying so much for these drones? These are not drones you spend $100 and some for in the shop. These are drones that protects the sovereignty of your nation. All right? We're going to put a ring around the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. This government ain't only talking it. We're doing it. We're leading the world. Okay? We're going to put a ring around the Bahamas. I hear you. Our government will invest. I hear your hometown. Our government will invest some $6,137,890 this coming fiscal period in that program. Mr. Speaker, the acquisition of 55 short and medium range drones signifies our government's commitment to keeping pace with technological advancements and integrated systems designed to improve intelligence, surveillance for migrant traffickers and poachers, and search and remain after natural disasters. It will also save human capital with reference to the deployment of personnel, downtime, and dangerous situations. Mr. Speaker, we are aware that bilateral agreements with the United States benefit both our nations. The government is appreciative to the government of the United States of America, particularly the Department of Defense, for the donation of a second long-range coastal radar system. Installation is on the way at the Coral Harbor base with a service date by the end of this year. Mr. Speaker, the government of the United States has indicated that approval was granted for 2 additional coastal radar systems, earmarked for Exuma and Ragged Island, costing $5 million. This will further strengthen detection, tracking, vessels apprehension, and people involved in illicit trade, as well as better facilitating search and rescue missions. Mr. Speaker, since installation of the first radar in Inagua, there has been 1,021 targets, of which 10 was of significant interest. The migrant landings have been severely hampered, as only 2 have been reported. Mr. Speaker, the first was the eastern end of Grand Inagua, which is traditionally used as a staging point for migrants seeking to enter the Turks and Caicos. The second was a single instance along the uninhabited keys of Ragged Island. Mr. Speaker, it is safe to conclude that the reduction in landings and increase in detections can be attributed to the deterring and detecting capabilities gained with the implementation of the new long-range coastal radar system. The Bahamas government, Mr. Speaker, under the Royal Bahamas Defense Force by extension, was also the recipient of a satellite-based over-the-horizon tracking system on board 17 of its vessels. On board 70 and communication centers that will permit real-time communications, tracking, and interception capability. Mr. Speaker, again, this government is ensuring that we protect our territorial water. All right? This is the people's government. This is when you have good leadership. This is when you have good leadership. This is when you have good leadership. This is when you have good leadership, South Andres. We got Galani. That's our man. That's my friend. All right? He is our leader. Mr. Speaker, since coming to office, this government has sought to focus. Let's get back to business. The people of the Bahamas, the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas are listening. South Andres, my cousin will hear what I have to say. She's enjoying this. Don't disturb her. He's my boy. Don't disturb her. Mr. Speaker, be cool. You know, be cool. Oh man, Mr. Speaker. See, my cousin will hear. Since coming to office, this government has sought to focus on purposeful recruitment. The rapidly evolving demands for services and operational activities means now, more than ever, that the Defense Force has to remain constantly cognizant of its human resource needs. Systematic efforts to recruit highly trained and committed personnel will require 240 men and women to be enlisted annually. During this fiscal year, 120 recruits were enlisted and 120 was approved for the current fiscal period. Half of that number is currently in training, and I believe they went into training on Saturday. And why half, you may ask? The Defense Force is engaging in its social distancing, and so they have a strategy. But the full 120 will be in shortly. In the upcoming fiscal period, our government will invest some $2.8 million to enlist another 240. On another matter involving human capital, a draft bill has been prepared to amend the retirement age for Marines from 55 years to the age of 60. The bill is currently being reviewed by the Law Review Committee. This, when passed, will serve to further prevent the loss of institutional knowledge as is being experienced. Such measures will serve to continuously increase human capital while meeting the demands of an ever-changing security environment, thereby mitigating threats to our peace and security. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of our government, our leader, the member for Kalani, and the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to thank the brave men and women of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force for their unselfish service. On behalf of a grateful nation, we say thank you. Boy, time runs. Mr. Speaker, I now move to the Bahamas Department of Correctional Services. The Bahamas Department of Correctional Services mandate is to maintain inmates in a safe and secure and humane environment that encourages rehabilitation and success, reintegration into society. Mr. Speaker, Commissioner Murphy continues to seek institutional reform despite incessant complaints from the public and human rights groups. We applaud him for the fine job that he is doing to get that agency on track. Mr. Speaker, the recidivism rate for the first quarter of the year is 14%, which reflects a 2% decrease compared to last year the same time. According to the United Nations Corrections, Justice and Human Rights, COVID-19 poses extraordinary risks to prison population in the Americas and the Caribbean. Unlike many countries which fail to consider meaningful preventive and control measures, the Commissioner, based on government policies, developed a systematic plan from the onset. To date, there are no confirmed cases of COVID-19 within the confines of the prison. The Commissioner and his staff have been commended by the Ministry of Health for their effective strategy. I congratulate the Commissioner for the work that he continues to do. We, within all of these agencies, when we met initially as a cabinet to discuss this, the member for Kalani told us all to go back and ensure that our agencies are meeting the standards and to develop those protocols for our agencies. Each of the agencies within national security did just that. They were ahead of the game, and now we're reaping the results of our planning. Mr. Speaker, maximum security was built in 1952 to accommodate some 432 inmates and without plumbing. Consequently, there is no space to consider toilets, and inmates have to endure the unsanitary conditions of slopping, which is the manual task of disposing of human waste. For decades, Mr. Speaker, the men and women at the Department of Corrections have been crying out to their leaders. However, their cry has fallen on deaf ears. We can't, Mr. Speaker, and we will not accept, not this government, that officers in a modern Bahamas will have to collect and transport human feces in bags on trucks. Although we are in difficult times, we have begun a pledge to rectify this problem once and for all. Mr. Speaker, to improve conditions, biodegradable sanitized waste bags consisting of $1,440 were introduced to the inmates can properly and securely dispose of their waste, although just a temporary solution. It is a small step in the right direction. In the upcoming fiscal period, Mr. Speaker, in the upcoming fiscal period, a sanitation truck for the disposal of human waste will be purchased to secure safe transport and disposal of waste. That don't deserve a round of applause. This caring government will purchase a waste truck that is equipped to remove the waste. We're looking out for our officers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to improve sleeping conditions, our government invested some $409,000 for 100 bunk beds, which were constructed by inmates. This simple, I just want to come here because this is very important for all to see. This is what we met in place. This is the administrative building of the prison. The roof was essentially destroyed during Matthew, never attended to. And so you had the leaders of the organization going to work, and when it rains, they need their umbrellas in their office, right? Coming into office, we say that's not acceptable. And as you can see, the work has begun to fix that. These are the beds below. The inmates, we're talking about rehabilitation, but you can't talk about rehabilitation without first attending to the needs of the officers and the inmates. Fixing the environment. I got a lot to talk about rehabilitation. Fixing the environment, right? And so those are the beds that are being made by our inmates. So would be said that we will do, instead of going out purchasing beds, we got sufficient inmates who could build beds. And so we want to save Bahamian people. We want to save the taxpayers' money. Okay? This simple act. So we talk about to improve sleeping conditions. We talked about the bed, right? This simple act now aids in better management of cells while improving living conditions. Okay? We have also introduced a 56 core transparent containers costing some $9,727 for the inmates in the maximum security for sorting, right? Only what fits in is authorized and allowed, and this reduces clutter and all that garbage that you will find generally on the floor of the cells. So we're working to improving the sanitary conditions at the prison. And so, Mr. Speaker, $328,000 was invested in renovations to the southern wing and maximum security, which has been transformed into a modern cell block comprising of new flooring, conditions, masonry, and aesthetics. In addition, the central intake facility benefited from capital development as it was transported into 2 dormitories for inmates enrolled at the BTVI program. Mr. Speaker, several other capital projects were undertaken to improve the working conditions. Repairs were completed to the Commissioner's office, the conference room, which experienced extensive damage during Hurricane Matthew in 2017. Additional renovations included staff bathrooms, lounge areas, the principal correctional officers block. And so we're trying to transform the prison. That's what we're trying to do. It's a very old facility. You can talk about it. You can say we need a new one, but we're not in that financial state where we can have a new prison at this moment. But we can certainly improve the condition of the one that's currently there. And you can see the work that's currently going on. All right? Those cells in maximum that were unattended to for decades. You go and you look at some of the blocks in maximum security now. The air conditioned, you have beds, you have everything. You can't talk. See, rehabilitation, you need a plan for rehabilitation. You can't just say, let's create an app, and then you implement that. There has to be a process. You can't rehabilitate someone if they're living in a hog pen. You can't talk. You ain't serious about it. So this government has a plan, and we're implementing that plan. And with citizen security and justice, that program that fell apart, that we have to save. With that, and the work that they're doing there, some good things are happening at the prison. Some good things. That's all I have to say, Mr. Speaker. Irrespective of fluctuation in inmate population, it is important for the facility to maintain control and stability. Security requires effective systems and procedures that are well coordinated to improve our security features. New surveillance rooms have been constructed in each wing in the southern area of maximum security for the purpose of individual monitoring. To complement the 24-hour compound patrols have been implemented, and a new BIDE policy at the Security Processing Center was introduced. You should see those patrol cars. Officers, they had no patrol car. They couldn't do patrol. Now strictly enforce, all bags are searched so as to better control and prevent prohibited items from unauthorized individuals from entering. We have to stop the cell phone from finding their way into prison. And Commissioner and his team are working to do just that. Mr. Speaker, the department as a facility has been a stepchild for so long. And so has the rehabilitative program for inmates. Agneston, we're fixing that though. Because we wait. You give us a job, we do it, right? That in the blood. During the fiscal period, 300 inmates successfully completed cohorts 2, 3, and 4 of the BTVI program. In conjunction with the Citizen Security and Justice in electrical, in plumbing, in barbering, in masonry, in auto mechanics, and in computers. Mr. Speaker, researchers suggest that if inmates are engaged in professional development, they are less likely to reoffend. Further, Mr. Speaker,
Give BJ Tommy some credit.
they are more likely to become financially self-sufficient
Give BJ
and
Tommy
responsible.
Give him some credit. BJ Tommy.
Mr. Speaker, I give everybody credit, calm down. I like to share. Mr. Speaker, during this upcoming fiscal period, $971,191 will be invested for improvements. Included are maximum security construction of the administrative block and the female facility, a state-of-the-art multi-purpose complex center, renovation of the extramural scheme dormitory, and upgrades of the housing facilities and the administrative building number 1. Mr. Speaker, the Security Processing Center will be relocated to Yamacraw Road, some $320,000, which $200,000 will be spent in the new fiscal year to restore the Remand Center water system. The system is challenged when attempting to supply water to the cell blocks for hygienic purposes. It is anticipated that the restoration process will require some 3 years to complete. Mr. Speaker, correctional facilities security systems are not an option. They are a necessity. Such technology keeps both guards, correctional personnel, and inmates safe. $1,057,885 will be invested in security and communication equipment because the current are obsolete and occasionally non-functional. So we can't have an agency like the Corrections Department without communications. Additionally, $200,000 will be invested in perimeter fencing to reduce intrusion, escapes, and entrance of contraband. The officers and inmates who recently received training through Citizen Security and Justice will carry out the work. Mr. Speaker, to supplement the aforementioned, $638,000 will be invested for firearms, ammunition, and bullets, and shank-proof vests. The equipment will serve to assist in the daily operation and in the event of unexpected uprisings. Mr. Speaker, the firearms are also needed for the recruitment training and firearm training certification. Mr. Speaker, to alleviate the Princess Margaret Hospital Some $46,368 will be invested for an X-ray and ultra scan machines. The equipment will allow both inmates and staff to obtain services in a timely manner, avoid long waits times at the hospital, less time away from work for officers, and the security of inmates outside of the compound will no longer come into question or be a concern. This will assist the agency from encountering logistical challenges as being experienced now due to COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, additionally, $1,175,736 will be invested to purchase a roll-on of garbage truck with dumpsters, an ambulance, vehicles for escorting food and personnel on compound, a tactical van for special escorts, and a vehicle to aid in the maintenance and travel throughout New Providence. Mr. Speaker, officers' training improves their competency in communications with considerations for respect and hardship and the human relationship, anger management and conflict and mediation. To date, 328 officers participated in firearms training and certifications, citizen security and justice program training and correctional practices, and senior law enforcement officers executive leadership development at the University of the Bahamas and Georgia International Law Enforcement, or GLE. Prior to COVID-19, 84 inmates were enrolled in BTVI training. However, the program was suspended until fall, and the inmates hope to graduate in December. In light of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, 14 officers participated in webinars hosted by the Caribbean and Brussels entities that focused on the use of personal protection equipment and technologies in corrections amid COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, also, we are in dialogue with Orange County Corrections Department to facilitate webinars and cell block management for our officers. Mr. Speaker, the department spends $1,968,000 annually on food. $1,968,000 annually on food. $48,000, Mr. Speaker, alone. $48,000 alone, Mr. Speaker, is spent on bread every month. $40,000 alone is spent on bread every month. We will invest, Mr. Speaker, some $368,367 to purchase cooking appliances, an industrial stove, which will allow for meals to be prepared in a timely manner, and the baking of bread. Mr. Speaker, if you were to look at the kitchen down at the Department of Corrections, you would cry. Can't be, Mr. Speaker. We can't talk about rehabilitation without addressing these fundamental and basic needs.
Bake bread, my brother. Bake bread.
Mr. Speaker, however, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian populace should not be forced to bear this cost. I have directed, coming it out, brother, I have directed the Commissioner of Corrections to provide to me a plan for self-sustainment that includes livestock rearing, farming, and technical maintenance. Oh yeah. You may like being commissioner, but under this government, we demand accountability for the people's monies. I have directed the commissioner to provide to me a plan for self-sustainment. This is all in conjunction with component 4 of the Citizen Security and Justice Plan, which centers on rehabilitation and institutional reform through inmate training. We will seek to farm a portion of the 64 acres of available land using the inmates in the prison. There is no reason that the inmates can't grow their own food for consumption, Mr. Speaker. Our goal is to reduce. That's another story. But our goal is to reduce, Mr. Speaker, is to reduce the drain on the public's purse. And we have been in discussions with the Minister of Agriculture, who is fully on board and ready to go. Fired up. He's fired up. He won't go now. I tell him, hold on, the commissioner trying to catch himself. But we will make this a reality. And I am looking forward to that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the administration acknowledges that our officers are employed in a facility that is considered demanding and one in which they have little control with reference to scheduling, numbers of inmates, and work environment. We are still working with the Office of the Attorney General on legislation that will create a Correctional Services Commission for the Bahamas Department of the Corrections, like the police officers. They get caught up in the public service and, promotion executed a while back. It takes a while to make the run through the public service. And so I just would like to assure the officers within the Bahamas Department of Correction that this government hasn't forgotten you. Your promotions are in train. It's just going through the process, and the process is what we're seeking to shorten by the introduction of a Correctional Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, they know, Mr. Speaker, in February of this year, if you all had fixed it, then we would have had this easy process. Right. I laid before this honorable House, in February of this year, I laid before this honorable House a Correctional Services Amendment Bill, which seeks to extend the service of those officers who fall below the rank of principal officer, the sergeants and below. I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to seeing this bill passed sometime during this fiscal period. Mr. Speaker, in addition, we will invest some $4,248,000 to recruit 260 officers to implement the deficit of personnel throughout the law enforcement. Mr. Speaker, there's so much to talk about, Sir Andres. This is when you're working government. Citizen Security and Justice Program. Citizen Security and Justice Program. The Citizen Security and Justice Program continues to make bold strides in its holistic approach to crime and violence prevention. Under the last administration, the side opposite that is, this project was on the verge of collapse. No, I said he was a good man. He was a good man. There's not a, I ain't gonna blame him. But the project was on the verge of collapse. No, he was a good man. I admired him. I don't pull him down. Don't do me like that. But it was on the verge of collapse, right? Under this administration, this administration, Mr. Speaker, the leadership. So this under the last administration, I talked about how the system is on the verge of collapse due to a lack of strong leadership and technical skills required to manage this multi-million-dollar capital project. Upon coming to office, our government resuscitated this program by working with qualified project managers who devised new strategies to benefit our youth, inmates, judicial sector, and communities. To ensure the successful implementation and integration of this project output, the team will maintain its place working for Bahamians until August 2022. The demand is great for centers to provide safe space for youth to engage in positive activities and social life skills. while providing opportunities for adults to continue their education. In a country, in a country, if a country is to progress, economically, socially, and politically, it is important for the adults to be educated as well. In the upcoming fiscal period, a large portion of the $400,000 will be invested for the construction of centers in Yellow Elder, Nassau Village, Camp Road, Seabridge. Huh? These are the centers. No, I understand. I can speak to you right now. Let me just show this around. So I understand, Mr. Speaker. I understand. Can someone put this out? Angliston asked me what happened to Angliston. Mr. Speaker, during the gerrymandering that took place prior to the last election, a portion of Angliston was put in Mount Moriah. Am I correct? No. Am I correct? A portion of Angliston was added to Mount Moriah.
Honorable member.
So you asked, what about Angliston? Angliston is being attended to.
Honorable member, the chair recognizes
All the time. I need some
the member for Angliston on the point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. The area that the member is talking about is Yellow Elder. It became part of Angliston because of gerrymandering under the Free National Movement in the 2012 elections. And no, it was removed because it's not an integral part of that community. So the gerrymandering comes before. So you could refer to that. It was never intended to be in Yellow Elder, however.
I love my Yellow Elder, and that part of Yellow Elder that was once Angliston, Old Cedar and the rest, they're my people. I love them to death. But y'all neglected them. Y'all threw them somewhere else. Right? But so to answer your question, Angliston, you said what happened to Angliston? Angliston is being attended to because you give Angliston to a Yellow Elder, and Yellow Elder is in Mount Moriah. All right. So thank you so much. You asked what happened to Angliston. I told you, but I love my people in Yellow Elder. Mr. Speaker, not only will these centers provide social and development spaces in the long term, it will also stimulate opportunities for small and medium enterprises and directly employ hundreds of workers in various positions. The economic stimulation will certainly be welcome post-COVID. The Citizen Security and Justice is procuring an evidence-based violence interrupters program that will use a tailored model to train 30 individuals throughout New Providence to stop violence before it happens and offer mediation within these at-risk communities throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, there is just so much to talk about here. And so in the interest of time, 9 minutes, yeah. In the interest of time, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important. It's important to talk about, no, it's important.
10 minutes.
How about? Okay, 10 minutes. That's okay. The rest, this will be made available to you, I understand. But you and I could know, you misinformed this Parliament. I could talk about that. No, I'm not going to talk to you and I can talk about that out there. Wherever, I understand, wherever, okay, so let me digress here a second. Let me digress. I got a minute for her. That's my cousin. I owe a minute. So Anderson came to this house. after receiving certain intelligence from I don't know who, and said that certain officers claimed that after working an extended period, they were paid $500. So, historian, and this was an event unexperienced. I mean, this was our first time going through this. What we had to do in order to ensure that, we make maximum use of our Defense Force and police officers on Abaco and Grand Bahama, we had to reduce the numbers at the centers. And so reserves were called upon to provide the necessary security at the center. It so happened that a number of these officers worked beyond the prescribed, I think it's 130 hours a month, somewhere around that. And so the police force was only budgeted to pay them for that period. So the commissioner then made a request, because it was not in his budget, Mr. Speaker, for a certain amount of funds based on the hours worked. All right, made a request for those funds to the ministry. That document was then taken to cabinet. It was in excess of $107,000. That was taken to cabinet, to which cabinet approved. And because the money was not available in the police fund, it was taken out of another line item within the ministry, just to ensure that we paid those officers for their hard work. I was informed that some officers had overtime of 2 hours, some had overtime of 5 hours, so it fluctuated. So they were paid based on the overtime because we had the extended list. That's what they were paid on. So if you work 2 hours, whatever that 2 hours, if you work 2 hours, you got your basic time paid by the force that you were allotted to. It was the overtime that we were addressing. So you were paid based on the hours that you worked. So it fluctuates from time to time. Some people may have gotten $100, some may have gotten $500, some may have gotten $1,000. It all depends on the hours worked. But I understand, I can't have you coming here to this honorable house and being misinformed. You were misinformed. And so I don't know where your source of information,
Honorable member,
or who your source of information is.
the chair
But
recognizes.
let's don't play games.
Thank Mr. No. Point of order.
Thank you, Speaker.
Please save my time.
Just for the edification of the minister, my source is more than one reservist officer. They advised that they were mobilized by the Prime Minister himself, and that they were giving certain undertakings that there would be parity between their pay and what ordinary police officers were getting. And it has not happened. One of them said they got swung, get swing. So I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying about how you see it. But the men and women who were mobilized and who put in all these hours and the overtime have a certain view about how they've been treated. And I brought it to this parliament.
Well, listen, I listen. The officers were paid for the time they worked, okay?
Just be aware.
All right? No.
You're upset,
And
right?
no, we've been working, the one or two you may have spoken to, I don't know who they are. You can refer them to me, and we can go over
They're
what they were paid.
listening right now.
I know, and that's why this government went over and beyond to take the additional funding out of another line item, all right, to pay the reserve officers. There are career officers who are working daily with extra hours and not getting anything. Okay?
I'm doing you a favor,
No.
deal with it.
Well, no, I've dealt with it. But
Right.
don't come to this parliament being misinformed by
No,
one
I'm
or
not
two persons.
misinformed.
You are.
I am reporting what the officers are.
Well, you were reporting wrong.
Well, they say they
So
were
let me
correct.
finish my
They
speech.
say they
You
were
reporting
correct.
wrong.
They say they were-
Enough. Stop from misinforming this honorable house. You were I gotta continue my speech now. I'm beyond you now. Let me finish. I got the people's business.
Honorable
to deal.
members, honorable members,
Mr. Speaker,
honorable member, if you have a point of order.
misinforming this parliament.
Informing. Yeah, no. Mr. Speaker, I will not have this member say I am misinforming this House. The members, the reservist officers who are mobilized, they say by the Prime Minister, who have been holding the shelters all these many months, say that what they were promised was not delivered. They are saying they get swing. It's not a misinformation. This is what they are saying. I am telling you what the reservist officers who are under your portfolio are saying about how they have been treated in those shelters.
It's very easy for anyone to come to this parliament and say they. Okay? Wait. No, please. Please, you spoke. Listen. Listen, I have the floor. I gave you a little piece of it. But now you ain't making sense. You are not making sense. Let me finish my speech. Mr. Speaker, Parliamentary
Honorable members, honorable members, honorable member,
Mr. Speaker.
honorable members,
Yeah, you can.
honorable members.
Go ahead. You go ahead. No, only you could say things. Only you can say things. That's a new day in the House.
Honorable members, the chair recognizes honorable member for Angleston. If you're requesting the chair, on a point of order.
Yes, I'm asking you to check me. The member is personally attacking me. I am telling him what has been reported to me, and he's telling me I ain't making no sense. I am reporting to you what reservist officers under your watch are communicating. Now, you could ignore it. They're watching, I'm getting the messages from, they're watching. And you could carry on all you want. If I were you, I'm just saying, I would seek to address it and to find out what is the issue. But if you'd rather take the position you do, no problem. It's up to you. But then, Speaker, I wonder if the member would realize the time I have gotten has come from the chair and not a little piece of nothing from this member. The Speaker allows points of order.
Honorable member, thank you.
Yes, please
Thank
let
you.
and let him calm down, man. He's get so uptight in this parliament, man. You know what that
The chair
is.
recognizes honorable member from Mount Moriah.
Mr. Speaker, unless the member for Angleston forget, the police reservists are my friends. Most of those who serve in the police reserves are my friends. I speak to police reservists daily. I get WhatsApp messages from police reservists daily. Is it perfect? No, there's no perfect, right? And they know that this minister, they know that this government, all right, they know that this government is committed to addressing their needs and concerns. We completed an audit of the reserves. That shows, that's a clear demonstration that this government is committed and serious about the Royal Bahamas Police Force Reserves. Okay? And I say, and I'm going to leave it, Mr. Speaker, to any reserve officer, regardless of the rank. You are free to call the minister. Come to my office, knock on the door. Okay? No, I ain't defensive, but I'm just telling you information was off. It's off. You don't see. Anyway, thank you so much. I don't dismiss their concern. You can have a copy then. Mr. Speaker, let me bring this home, please. This is a parliamentary registrar. I think it's important for me to talk about the Parliamentary Registration Department. Yes. And now I'll move to the Parliamentary Registration Department, which is responsible for ensuring that all eligible Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, have the opportunity to register and vote in free and fair elections. In the Bahamas, the last general election was held on May 10th, 2017. And it has now been 3 years since then. Article 66 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, mandates that the new general election shall be held no later than 5 years after the first sitting of Parliament, which occurred on May 24, 2017. Further, Section 14 of the Parliamentary Elections Act mandates that the Parliamentary Commissioner prepare a voters' register in readiness for the expiration of the current register. Mr. Speaker, the voters' register by law has a life of no more than 5 years and came into force by Gazette on July 14, 2016. It expires no later than July 15, 2021. The current voters' register as of March 19, 2020 has a count of 188,051 persons, including 129,610 New Providence, 30,121 Grand Bahama and Bimini, 28,320 in the Family Islands. Mr. Speaker, it is intended that the national voters registration exercise will begin sometime, hopefully shortly, as soon thereafter, as it is practicable due to the existing environmental and health circumstances. The exercise in New Providence and Grand Bahama will be decentralized in the first instance, and each constituency as of January 2021. Local government elections are mandated to be held every 3 years, and the last election was in June 2016. In light of the existing emergency orders, these elections will not be held. They're intended for later in this year, once it is practicable, and within 3 months after the suspension of the existing emergency order. Mr. Speaker, let me close, and I'll bring it home. Engliston, can I bring it home? All right, so, Mr. Speaker, as this fiscal period draws to an end, it is one that we will never forget. Dorian, now COVID-19, have tested our will and fortitude as a people, and most certainly as a government. Mr. Speaker, the fact that we are here today, having endured both, is a testament to who we are as a people. Mr. Speaker, this budget ensures that we safeguard the economic engine of our nation. We are in good hands. We are in God's hands. Together, there is nothing we can't accomplish. This too shall pass. Better days are coming, Mr. Speaker. Better days are coming. Mount Moriah supports the 2030.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Freetown.
Oh, Engliston, I'm so delighted to see you today. I'm sure we're going to have a love fest in this house today. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the great people of Freetown to support this fourth F&M budget. Mr. Speaker, I am forever grateful and humbled by the opportunity afforded me by the people of Freetown to serve them in this honorable house, and I endeavor, and I promise, to continue to represent their interests, their views, their needs, their wants, and to ensure that they receive the attention that they deserve from the government that I represent. I love the great people of Freetown, and I want them to love me. And so I will end my presentation today, as I started, by speaking directly to them about our accomplishments over the past year and what to expect in the upcoming year. Mr. Speaker, I must say, I was immensely impressed with the budget presentation of the Minister of Finance and member for East Grand Bahama. Despite the lack of good news across the globe and its obvious negative effect on our local economy, he gave us hope and confidence that with his tenacity and his laser-like focus, he had this very difficult matter in hand. Mr. Speaker, there were no new taxes, a huge relief to the Bahamian people, and the Bahamian people were assured once again of a government that is honest, transparent, free of financial scandal, that is responsibly managing the economy of the Bahamas in the best interests of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, I was, like many Bahamians, concerned about a budget that projects a record-breaking, eye-popping deficit of $1.3 billion. But, Mr. Speaker, I was delighted nonetheless that the deficit was not projected to be $2 billion. And I am sure that my good friend, who's not here today, from Exuma was delighted too. And this projected record-breaking deficit is a far cry from the record-breaking budget that we presented last year, which projected a deficit of only $137 million. Of course, last year's budget was record-breaking in the sense that it projected the smallest budget deficit in over a decade. Mr. Speaker, this F&M government was on a good wicket. The economy was thriving, the number of employed persons was growing, tourism arrivals were exceeding all past records. In short, the country was on the up and up. And as we had promised the Bahamian people, and unlike the Christie Davis, Hannah Martin administration, we were using all additional tax revenue from this robust growth to reduce the annual deficit. So our first year in office, no, I can be cool. So our first year in office, we increased the national debt by $693 million, paying off PLP bills. Our second year in office, we increased the national debt by a far lower $284 million. And this year, our third year in office, we projected that we would only have to increase the national debt by $137 million. Mr. Speaker, the ordinary man and woman could see where we were headed. After 5 years of fiscal irresponsibility with the Christie Davis, Hannah Martin administration, the Minis Turnquest, and I'm going to take a liberty here, Mr. Speaker, so forgive me, the Minis Turnquest Diagular administration was managing things right. We were reducing our deficit. We were reducing our deficit, making the tough decisions to begin to live within our means, returning confidence to our ability to manage our financial affairs responsibly and prudently, while at the same time vastly improving our transparency so that the people could see exactly what we were doing with the people's money. Ain't nobody can ever ask where the bad money going. Because all you had to do was open this document, go online, and you can, at your leisure, flip through the 276 pages of this document and see where every penny of your tax and borrowed money is being spent. Also, the Minister of Finance and Financial Secretary are all over the TV, the radio, WhatsApp, Facebook, Zoom, WebEx, the new social media platforms, fielding the tough questions and explaining the facts with easy-to-read charts and easily digestible bullet points about what is embedded in this document. They ain't scared, Mr. Speaker. They ain't running from the people. They telling it like it is. You want the facts? Well, they giving them to you. And last, Mr. Speaker, our well-intentioned and best-laid plans were thrown off course by first Hurricane Dorian at the beginning of September 2019, and then pandemic coronavirus in the latter part of March 2020. These two body blows have been incredibly traumatic, and the country is still reeling from the effects of these two seismic events. But Mr. Speaker, you don't know how many people have approached me and lamented, on the one hand, at our bad luck at being in office during these two monumental disasters, while on the other hand, expressing gratitude that at least we are in office managing things and not the PLP. We have not been perfect, Mr. Speaker, but at least you ain't hear no stories. Like the stories you heard when they was managing their disaster. No, sir. The member for Kalani, our prime minister, has kept us focused and on point. And yes, we have made mistakes. But if we took a left turn when we should have taken a right turn, we quickly adjusted. We quickly changed course. And thank God we had a doctor at the helm during this pandemic and not a lawyer like Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador. Could you imagine? Kalani has successfully guided us through a difficult period, using his vast knowledge and experience as a doctor to achieve the impressive COVID-19 results that we have achieved. And now, we will call upon him to dig deep, to help guide us back once again to the impressive economic results we enjoyed prior to COVID-19 and Hurricane Dorian. Mr. Speaker, I heard the very tiresome back and forth between the Shadow Minister of Finance, the member for Exuma, and the Minister of Finance, the member for East Grand Bahama, about who has borrowed the most. The opposition has gone to great lengths to mislead, in my opinion, the Bahamian people about the amount of money borrowed by this government. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? What everyone has failed to remember is that the borrowing of the PLP will be depressed, will be lower for the last 2.5 years of their term, because they introduced the value-added tax in 2015 and took in $219 million in additional revenue in 2015, $628 million in additional revenue in 2016, and $638 million in additional revenue in 2017 from the value-added tax. You know what that adds up to, Mr. Speaker? You know what that adds up to? Almost $1.5 billion in additional revenue that they took off the backs of the Bahamian people. That's what they did, Mr. Speaker. That's what they did. They took VAT from 0 to 7.5. Yes, we took it from 7.5 to 12. But I think that everyone would agree that the increase in VAT from 0 to 7.5 is a heck of a lot more than the increase from 7.5 to 12. So don't get misled, Mr. Speaker, by these borrowing numbers put forward by the PLP. Oh, the F&M borrowed $3 billion for the last 2 years. They borrowed $3 billion. I heard Exuma say it. I heard Eggleston say it. I even heard Pine Ridge say it. They borrowed $3 billion. But, Mr. Speaker, like any good opposition, they're only telling you half the story. Yes, on page 33 of the budget book, it states that we borrowed $3 billion for the 2 years ending June 30th. But what it also says on page 3 of the same book is that the national debt, the total amount owed by the country, increased by only $1 billion for that same period. So let me break it down, Mr. Speaker, so everyone can understand. We borrowed $3 billion, but our national debt only went up by $1 billion. How did it win? I repeat, we borrowed $3 billion, but our national debt only went up by $1 billion. What the PLP would have you believe is that we borrowed the $3 billion and our national debt went up by $3 billion. But that is not what the numbers reveal. What they reveal, Mr. Speaker, is that we borrowed the $3 billion, but our national debt only went up by $1 billion. Why, Mr. Speaker? Why? Because of the $3 billion that we borrowed, we paid off $2 billion of existing debt and added $1 billion of this borrowing to the national debt. We took in $3 billion, we paid off $2 billion, and $1 billion went to the national debt. Mr. Speaker, I hope that clears up. I'm an accountant. I'm a certified public accountant. Mr. Speaker, trust me. It's my field. That's what I know. I know numbers. Mr. Speaker, that clears up.
You have a fiduciary responsibility.
So I have a little comment for my friend, the Minister of Finance. I go, attention, East Grand Bahama, attention. You need to add to the budget book a page called repayment of borrowings so that the Shadow Minister of Finance can do the math and not make these misleading, in my opinion, misleading statements going forward. If you add that page on the repayment of borrowings, you will be able to see what we borrowed and what we repaid. And then East Grand Bahama, help Exuma with the math to see how this borrowing and this repayment leads to an increase in the national debt. Lay it out. Print it in black and white. And let us be done once and for all with this very tiresome back and forth year after year. As we move forward, Mr. Speaker, I am calling it now. This F&M government will likely borrow more money than the previous PLP government. I'm calling it now. With the effects of Category 5 Hurricane Irma bashing the Southern Islands and New Providence in 2017. With the effects of Category 5 Hurricane Dorian devastating our two most important islands outside of New Providence, Abaco and Grand Bahama in 2019. And now with the effects of Category 10 Hurricane Coronavirus devastating the entire economy in 2020. Our borrowing will have to be unprecedented, record-breaking, in the realm of the $1.3 billion presented here today. So, Exuma, when you stand up next year, yes, we know. We understand that our borrowings will be more than the PLP. We get that. But remember that the borrowings of the PLP were reduced by $1.5 billion in additional VAT money. And remember this too. Think on this. In the 1 year that we did not have a hurricane or a pandemic, 2018 to 2019, we demonstrated to the Bahamian people that we managed their money effectively and responsibly and reduced the deficit to $219 million, the lowest deficit in a decade. We will always have that record for many years to come, the lowest annual deficit in a decade. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the operating budget for the Ministry of Tourism, Head 67 in this budget book, the Ministry of Tourism has been cut by almost 14 million, or 19%, from 73.6 million for 2018-2019 to 59.7 million for 2019 and 2020. Mr. Speaker, this cut is deep, but the new economic realities demand it, and we have to make do with less. Mr. Speaker, you will also note that the budgeted amounts for personal emoluments of the Ministry of Tourism, because I know they can bring this up, dropped by 2.6 million from 21.4 million last year to 18.8 million this year. This was the result of over budgeting for that line item in the 2018-2019 budget due to simply adjusting personal emoluments upward every year, year after year, without consideration for retirements and resignations. When I ordered an in-depth analysis of this line item, because it didn't make sense to me, because I'm an accountant, the over budgeting was discovered, and this year's number better reflects what the cost will be for the upcoming year. To be clear, Mr. Speaker, there will be no reduction in headcount in the Ministry of Tourism, just more accurate, more precise budgeting for the personal emoluments line item. The other components of the Ministry of Tourism and Aviation, namely Bahamas Air, the Bahamas Civil Aviation Authority, Airport Authority, Nassau Flight Services, Air Transport Advisory Board, the Gaming Board, and the Hotel Corporation are budgeted to cost the taxpayer $46 million this year, as opposed to $57 million last year, a reduction of 18%. Once again, Mr. Speaker, these cuts are deep, but it is what it is. We don't have it. We have to do what we can with less. Before I leave my analysis of the budget, I want to throw out a word of caution. I heard the member for Exuma pound the point that we should be bold, be brave, and undertake some transformational projects. But what I did not hear was what specifically he meant by be bold, be brave, go big. Be bold like how? Be brave like what? Go big, so show me. You see, Mr. Speaker, when we hear the PLP say be bold, be brave, go big, we have flashbacks to the Christy Davis, Hannah Martin administration. When be bold, be brave, go big resulted in such financial fiascos as BAMSI, Carnival, and the Star Academy, where tens of millions of taxpayers' money was in the minds of many, wasted in their pursuit of these be bold, be brave, go big projects, which turned out to be poorly planned, lacked a credible sense of purpose, and an implementation plan that was so poorly devised that the wasted, my word, Mr. Speaker, the wasted funds were inevitable. I heard the member for Cat Island and Rumkey and San Salvador talk about his sudden disdain and dislike for waste. You forget BAMSI, eh? Exuma, you as my friend, stay clear of that expression. It conjures up too many nightmares of fiscal irresponsibility and wasted money by your predecessors, whom I am delighted to observe you had absolutely nothing to do with. Tourism. I'm on to tourism. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Ministry of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, this F&M government and all the excellent employees at the Ministry of Tourism were doing such a great job in our #1 industry before events clearly not under our control completely derailed and decimated the economic engine of our Bahama land. In 2019, we ended the year with record arrivals. Never in the history of our country had we welcomed over 7.2 million foreign visitors, an increase of 9.4% over the 2018 numbers. Air arrivals stood at a record 1.8 million in 2019, up 10.5% compared to the same period in 2018. And you will remember, Mr. Speaker, that foreign visitors arriving by air spend 20 times more than a cruise passenger. So economically, they are much more impactful. What was also so amazing about this 10.5 increase in air arrivals was that increase was after taking into consideration the effects of Hurricane Dorian, which we all know devastated our air arrivals into Abaco, our second busiest destination after Nassau, and Grand Bahama, our third busiest stopover destination. Had we not had that hurricane, air arrivals would have been up almost 20%. That was how well our tourism sector was doing. This increased air arrivals was translating into increased employment, and the number of persons employed had grown by almost 15,000 since 2017, mainly due to the success that we were enjoying in the tourism sector. It is important to note, Mr. Speaker, that 2019 was also a record for our Family Islands, where for the first time, foreign visitor arrivals burst through the 300,000 mark, coming in at almost 307,000. Mr. Speaker, I have to pause here and thank the Ministry of Tourism sales and marketing team, led by Joy Jibralou, the Director General, Tommy Thompson, the Deputy Director General, Mia Wishlang, Head of Global Communications, and Bridget King, Head of U.S. Sales, who really did an excellent job of maximizing our tourism arrivals prior to the storm, and who, after Dorian, once again, did a fantastic job of getting the message out that not all of the Bahamas was devastated and destroyed, and that 14 of our 16 destinations were still open, unimpacted, and ready for business. It was because of them and their incredible teams at the Ministry of Tourism, Mr. Speaker, that allowed us to achieve these records. And the nation really owes them a debt of gratitude for the incredible job that they did in 2019 and continue to do in our #1 industry. Cruise arrivals also achieved new records in 2019, with 5.4 million visitors entering the country by cruise ship, an increase of 11.3% over 2018. Those 5.4 million cruise passengers ended up making 8 million stops in the Bahamas, since studies show that 1/3 of all cruise passengers visit 2 or more destinations during their cruise through the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, 2020 started off strong, with cruise arrivals up 26% for January and February, and air arrivals down by only 3.3% as the effects of Hurricane Dorian on Abaco and Grand Bahama arrivals continue to be felt. We are on track for another record year. And then sadly, Category 10, Hurricane Coronavirus, struck and totally wiped out all tourist arrivals to the Bahamas, bringing our #1 industry and the driver of much of our economy to a hard, cold stop. Mr. Speaker, today, the Bahamas and the global community confront an immense economic challenge brought about by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of all the economic sectors, tourism has been the worst hit. Overall, the International Monetary Fund expects the global economy to contract by an average of 3% in 2020 and to rebound in 2021, up 5.8% on average. This new global recession has placed extreme pressure on businesses of all sorts, especially in service industries and the tourism sector. The United Nations World Tourism Organization, the UNWTO, has noted that globally, the tourism industry remains at a standstill, as some level of COVID-related travel restriction remains in place in 100% of tourist destinations, and borders remain completely closed to international tourism in 72% of destinations. As such, Mr. Speaker, the tourism industry is among the most heavily affected by the continuing health crisis and is expected to continue to feel the effects of the concurrent economic crisis for some time. In this regard, the UNWTO has noted that international tourism was down by 22% in the first quarter of 2020 and could decline by as much as 60 to 80% over the course of the year, depending on how long it takes for international borders to reopen and travel restrictions to ease. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas happens to be one of the most tourism-dependent countries of the Caribbean. The pandemic has cost us losses of almost $1 billion in tourism revenue and close to 40,000 jobs. The impact on our sector has been unimaginable. 3 months ago, I impressed upon this chamber the now famous words, "There will be no tourists." And for 90 days, we have collectively borne the burden of this devastating reality. It has been heartbreaking for everyone who has worked so hard to see the rebound of our destination following Hurricane Dorian in September of last year. Mr. Speaker, I have purposely added these somber and sobering comments into my presentation because it is critical that, as a nation, we squarely face the harsh reality of the world of COVID-19. I hasten to add that my tourism team and our key industry partners are not in any way daunted by our new economic reality, harsh as it may be. As the Ministry of Tourism and key industry partners resolutely go about the business of implementing our country's strategic plan for tourism recovery, we feel a keen sense of encouragement and hope for several reasons. Mr. Speaker, in a few minutes, I will lay out the principal features of our tourism recovery plan. But before I launch into that discussion, I'd like to expound briefly on the realities that give us hope in the face of a future clouded with uncertainty. Our greatest source of encouragement, Mr. Speaker, comes from the Bahamian people. The Bahamian people is whose middle name spells resilience. The Bahamian people is one who have weathered many a storm with steadfast determination and emerged victorious. The Bahamian people is one that is uncompromising in their shared pursuit of excellence. We are a people who are powered by faith, a people who, with each setback, loss, and tragedy, rise again and again.
That's it.
The nature of our people inspires us with hope. But, Mr. Speaker, there are also other encouraging realities. Our geography is one that is favorable to our economic recovery. We are a mere 50 miles off the coast of the United States, the source market from where close to 82% of our visitors originate. The watchword of the era of COVID-19 and beyond is social distancing, and we welcome this. Indeed, our 700-island-strong archipelago with so many sparsely populated remote islands is designed for social distancing. We are also encouraged by feedback from travel consumers. In the 21st century, travel is no longer seen as a luxury. It is considered an inalienable right. The world is now in the third month of shelter in place and self-isolation. The evidence all around us is showing that quarantine fever is setting in. People are bursting at the seams to get out and explore the world once again. Recent data from a poll of our country's primary source market, North America, indicates that 75 to 83% of respondents are ready to travel again. Airlines are already indicating, particularly for the months of August and beyond, an uptick in demand as people book flights for travel to the Bahamas. Being cautiously optimistic, Mr. Speaker, we interpret this increased desire for travel to the Bahamas as an indication that our country will see a rebound in tourism earlier than anticipated. Mr. Speaker, for the fiscal year 2020-2021, the mission of the Ministry of Tourism, its key industry partners and stakeholders is tourism recovery. However, any mission is only effective as it's planned. And so, after wide consultation with our industry partners, contracted agencies, stakeholders, and after probing research analytics, I'm satisfied that my ministry has crafted a tourism recovery plan that will guide us in uncharted waters to gradually recapture and rebuild our market share temporarily lost by COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, while it is of paramount importance to relaunch our economy, we will be guided first and foremost by concern for the health and well-being of our residents and visitors. An integral part of our tourism recovery plan is vigilance in adhering to international standards in protocols and best practices for keeping our residents and visitors safe from contagion. I am proud of the fact that my ministry, in partnership with the Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Association, worked alongside public and private sector partners, including the Nassau Paradise Island Promotion Board, Paradise Island Tourism Development Association, Bahama Out Island Promotions Board, Grand Bahama Island Tourism Board, Nassau Airport Development Company, Nassau Cruise Ports, Association of Bahamas Marinas, Hutchison Port, Grand Bahama Airport Company, Freeport Harbor Company, and the Freeport Container Port, and the Bahamas Ministry of Health have all come together to form the Tourism Readiness and Recovery Committee. The aim of this committee was to provide a roadmap for the government and other tourism industry stakeholders to use as a guide to prepare for the imminent reopening of the Bahamas' internal and external borders to local and international travel, and to re-enter the tourism market in a strategic manner, which considers health and safety pivotal to the sustained restoration of the Bahamian tourism economy. Mr. Speaker, I salute and thank this hard-working group for their indefatigable energy and focus in creating a stellar plan for our industry, one that we can all be proud of. I am told that there were close to 30 subcommittees and over 150 people who contributed from every sector that impacts tourism, including destination management organizations, hotels, taxis, vendors, to name a few. Falling upon the development of the Tourism Readiness and Recovery Committee plan, my ministry went into full gear to begin training frontline workers and how to apply the plan to their everyday lives moving forward. Mr. Speaker, in preparation for the opening of the tourism sector, my ministry, along with the Ministry of Health and Department of Environmental Health, conducted a series of 6 tourism compliance workshops over the course of 3 days. While the in-person sessions were conducted at the Hilton Hotel, these workshops were simultaneously streamlined online to participants throughout the length and breadth of the entire Bahamas. Our goal was to provide customer service training, biosecurity protocols, and sensitization to the frontline workers in the tourism industry. Our aim was to engage all tourism touchpoints within the country, including public service drivers, hoteliers, retailers, straw vendors, beach vendors, land and sea-based attractions and tours, marinas, hair braiders, restaurants, and bars. Each workshop consisted of health and personal safety guidelines, as well as a recap of how COVID-19 is transmitted by the Ministry of Health, proper cleaning and sanitization protocols by the Department of Environmental Health, and exemplary customer service and compliance once domestic and international travel resumes by our own industry training unit. To date, Mr. Speaker, I am proud to report we have trained a total of 7,545 front-facing industry workers across most islands, 1,150 in person, and 6,395 virtually with the assistance of the Bahamas Information Services. Although this is an impressive accomplishment, we hope to have many thousands of persons in the industry yet to be trained register for the next series of virtual and in-person sessions slated to be held on Tuesday, June 23rd. Mr. Speaker, as we prepare to forge ahead with tourism recovery, it will do us good to remember once again the track record we had set in tourism over the last 10 years. Within that span of time, our tourism was firmly entrenched in an upward trajectory, having experienced a whopping 50% increase over 10 years, topping out with the record-breaking 7 million plus visitors in 2019. In recent years, our destination earned numerous prestigious travel awards and accolades. In short, the hardworking people of the Bahamas have built for this country a reputation as one of the world's leading warm weather island beach destinations. Mr. Speaker, this solid reputation will put us in good stead as we strive to recover our tourism economy through and post-COVID-19. But Mr. Speaker, as we look at the travel marketplace, what does the current landscape look like? Intelligence from ongoing research indicates that travel consumers are surprisingly beginning to feel that the worst is over. Indeed, they are looking forward to the lifting of travel restrictions and have not yet given up hope on that much anticipated summer vacation. They're eager for a relaxing getaway to rejuvenate from months of being pent up in quarantine. Consumers are now actively dreaming and searching for vacation ideas. Beach vacations to relax and rejuvenate are what travelers are seeking. For their first post-quarantine getaway, however, consumers are skittish about venturing too far from home. They have their eyes set on domestic locations. Fortunately for us, the Bahamas, because of its proximity, is viewed by U.S. consumers as a domestic location. Further, in a recent survey undertaken by TripAdvisor, a company that is now synonymous with honest review of travel, they looked at what their consumers wanted to looked at where their customers wanted to travel across three categories: the Americas, Europe and the Middle East, and Asia, Pacific, and China. Of course, the Americas topped the list, where people from our largest source market, the United States, want to travel. Two, and the best news of all, is the Bahamas topped the list of places in the Americas to visit, and by extension, also topped the global list. We should all pause and let this sink in. We live in a place that the world absolutely wants to visit. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that on Monday past, the 15th of June, the Bahamas commenced the phased opening of the tourism sector. Phase one of the Tourism Readiness and Recovery Plan saw the return of international boaters, yachters, and private aviation back to Bahamian shores and across all the islands of the Bahamas. During this phase, hotels will reopen on a limited basis for staff to return to work and put in place all the measures required to ensure that we are ready to welcome guests if and when we move to phase two. This is the first part of the strategic phased reopening approach for the tourism sector that ensures critical health and safety protocols are being adhered to and that the health sector remains well equipped and ready to respond as necessary. Allowing phase one access to these smaller, low density, special interest groups will ensure a more controlled segment to test the country's new health and safety measures. The second phase right now is planned to commence on the 1st of July, and we'll see the resumption of international commercial travel and the opening of some hotels that are ready to resume operations. We anticipate beginning to see arrivals starting again, and begin the slow climb back to some level of normalcy many months ahead within this COVID-19 environment. Mr. Speaker, there's been much concern expressed about the reopening of the country to foreign visitors, allowing them and Bahamians returning home after July 1 to enter the country without, I repeat, without some form of testing to determine their COVID status. That's what we said first. Let me finish. The concern expressed has been as a result of what we have all been watching on our televisions and reading on social media and in the newspapers about what is happening in the United States, the source of 82% of our foreign visitors. With the reopening of businesses in all 50 states and the protests that have been taking place in many of the major cities throughout the US, most states are now reporting spikes in the number of positive results from COVID-19. This has put the Bahamas in an extremely difficult position. On the one hand, we need foreign visitors to return to our country to restart our economy. Foreign visitors from the United States, especially from Florida, Georgia, Texas, and the Northeast states of New York and New Jersey and Connecticut and Massachusetts, form the bulk of our annual visitors. We need them to come to restart our tourism sector and put our people back to work. On the other hand, however, there are the legitimate health concerns that these very people that we need to restart our vital tourism sector and put our people back to work could end up causing a spike in COVID-19 cases here in the Bahamas and undoing the excellent results that the Ministry of Health has achieved in keeping our death rate low. Mr. Speaker, my heart goes out to the 11 families who have lost loved ones to this horrible virus, especially my parliamentary colleague, the member for Yamakor. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the government faces a dilemma to which there is no easy decision. Open up and face a potential spike in COVID-19 cases and possible deaths, or stay closed and face continued economic hardship. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 will be here with us for the rest of our lives. It is a new virus for which there is no cure. And so we must all learn to live with this virus and mitigate the risk of exposure as best as we can. That is why the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health keeps hammering the importance of social distancing and hand washing and the wearing of masks. When we see people all over social media ignoring these simple requests, it is frustrating to those of us that are, since we know that the lack of discipline plays on the mind of the competent authority in deciding whether we can go further to open our economy and, dare I say, go to the beach here in New Providence. Mr. Speaker, being the accountant that I am, I've looked at the number of COVID-19 fatalities in the aforementioned states, and I've calculated were all 380,000 of Bahamians located in Florida, we would have suffered 55 fatalities, and not the 11 that we have. Were we all in Georgia, we would have suffered 87 fatalities, and not the 11 that we have. And were all 380,000 of us were located in New York, we would have suffered 466 fatalities, and not the 11 that we have. Mr. Speaker, as a country, we have fared far better than all of the states in the United States in terms of keeping our people safe and alive, and I salute the Prime Minister and the former Minister of Health and all of the nation's healthcare workers for a job well done. So what are we to do now? As mentioned, we have opened the country to foreign visitors wishing to come here by private plane or pleasure craft or yacht. These persons will require a molecular swab, PCR COVID-19 test with a negative result to enter the country. Given the spike in the number of positive COVID tests in the United States and the uncertainty surrounding just how many cases will require the hospitalization, the government of the Bahamas has decided to maintain the current status quo until further notice. What we mean by that, Mr. Speaker, is that the government of the Bahamas, which now requires a COVID-19 test to enter the country up to July 1, will also require a COVID-19 test after July 1. When we made our initial decision, evidence supported the opening of the tourism sector without the test. We had the full support of the tourism sector for this decision, but things have changed. The situation has become unclear and ever-changing. So a prudent government must reassess and readjust all decisions related to this COVID-19 virus as the situation evolves on the ground. And that is what we are doing here today. But I wish to impress once again on the Bahamian people the difficulty of the decisions that we have to make. Stay closed or make it difficult for the economy to reopen, and we will continue to suffer economic hardship and high unemployment. Or open too quickly or too wide and face an increase in the number of COVID-19 cases and possible fatalities. This is a hard decision to get right, Mr. Speaker, but we will do our endeavor best to walk that fine line to mitigate the risks of COVID-19 as best as we can, hopefully with the full support and prayers of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, as we move forward with tourism recovery through and post-COVID-19, you want me to stop it? Okay, yeah.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Tourism has much more, tourism and aviation has much more. He's at an ample point in his contribution where he'd like to take a break. And so, Mr. Speaker, we will take the luncheon break and we shall suspend then, Mr. Speaker, until 3 p.m. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House to suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many members that are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.